celebration for We Are Church Ireland next year. We'll be 25 years in Ireland, which is a bit of a milestone. We're a bit behind Germany and Austria, who started a year or two ago. But it's 25 years. We've been putting up our 5 goals from We Are Church. And whereas they were very radical 25 years ago, now they're being discussed in most places around the world. Our agenda for this evening, we're going to have our usual prayer and introduction, and then the talk from Bishop Paul Dempsey, and we're delighted to have here with us tonight. Then we'll have a Q&A session. And at the Q&A session, there'd be 3 ways you could join in. You can use the chat function if you want to put your question in the chat, or else you can, if you look at the reactions down there, I think that's where it is, you can raise a hand and that'll come up electronically on your screen. Or if you're not comfortable with that or don't know about that, just wave, and hopefully either John or myself would spot you, and then we make a note and we try and get as many people in as possible. The Q&A will not be recorded. It's just the main talk that's being recorded this evening. And I think that's it. So on that note, is Nives there? She is. I see her there in red. Nives, I'll hand over to you for our opening prayer, please.
I have chosen a prayer from Hildegard of Bingen that expresses the cry of the Church in crisis and despair. The title is Rivers of Fire. Again, I am in turmoil. Should I speak, or must I be silent? I feel like a gnarled old tree, withered and crooked and flaky. All the stories of the years are written on my branches. The sap is gone. The voice is dead. But I long to make again a sacred sound. I want to sound out God. I want to be a young, juicy, sap-running tree so that I can sing God, and God knows how. Oh God, you gentle viridity. Oh Mary, honeycomb of life. Oh Jesus, hidden in sweetness and flowing honey. Release my voice again. I have sweetness to share. I have stories to tell. I have God to announce. I have green life to celebrate. I have rivers of fire to ignite. Hildegard of Bingen.
Thanks, Nives. Lovely. Thank you very much. I'd now ask John Farley, will you please introduce Bishop Paul for us?
Paul Dempsey studied in Milltown Institute, Carlow College and All Hallows College before being ordained priest in 1997. And after further study, completed a master's in theology in 2008. As a priest, he served as curate in my own parish of Clane and Rathcoffey, where he was much beloved and is remembered very fondly. He also served in the parish cluster of Naas, Salins and 2 Mile House, before being appointed parish priest of Newbridge, which is the post he held before being appointed Bishop of Achonry in 2020. In his priestly ministry, he engaged regularly with the media, writing for a local newspaper and presenting a radio program on KFM. According to Sarah MacDonald, reporting in the Irish Times in February 2021, he and Bishop Fintan Gavin of Cork, on a webinar hosted by the Association of Catholic Priests, announced that there would be a major synod which would bring together all sections of the Irish Church to look at the crisis of faith, address the need for reform and renewal, and respond to the legacy of the COVID-19 pandemic. Bishop Dempsey told the members of ACP and other Catholic reform groups present that a synod will not be an end in itself, but plans to set out a way of being church in Ireland. We Are Church welcomes Paul Dempsey among us today, and we look forward to hearing him expand on this vision of the synod. And in light of the Rome Synod announced recently and other synodal processes happening in various parts of the world, him giving us an update on where things are with the Irish process. Paul, you're very welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Great, thanks a million, John, and thanks to Colm as well. Now, Colm and John and I were just experimenting a little bit earlier on with this, so I'm hoping that this thing will work for us here now. So you should see me there now at the bottom of the screen. So Cora was saying she saw a little piece from Jeremiah there. So I just hope maybe to start with a little piece from Jeremiah, just a line basically. And thanks to Nives for the lovely prayer that she shared with us. But just maybe for tonight, I think this little piece, most of you might be familiar with it, but I think it might just touch into what we're about as we open up this discussion between ourselves this evening. So it's taken from Jeremiah 29, and the little line goes, "This is what Yahweh says, for I know what my plans for you are, plans to save you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and to give you hope." And Yahweh says, "When you call on me, I will listen. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. For Yahweh says, I will let myself be found by you." So John was mentioning there a little bit of my story, and maybe just to share another little bit of that, because what I find sometimes people think that maybe a bishop falls out of the sky or something like that. So maybe just to share a little bit of my story, because it does tune into what we're about here this evening. As John was saying there, I was born in 1971, so I turned the big 50 this year. So I just turned 50, and I was born in Carlow town. And then we moved to Kildare when I was about 6 or 7 or thereabouts. So I've lived in Kildare all of my life, apart from the time I've come over here to the west of Ireland. And my background is probably the typical background that you'll find of any young fella from Ireland. I would have went to the junior school, to the Sisters of Mercy would have educated me in kind of junior cycle, and then I moved on to the Christian Brothers, and their schools, the primary school and secondary school was run by the Christian Brothers. They were getting very scarce at that stage, but they held maybe the principalships and so on of the schools that I was in. The family that I come from, I'm the youngest of my family. I have a brother and 2 sisters, and we would have went to Mass on a Sunday. We didn't pray the rosary now or anything like that at home, or we wouldn't have said grace before meals or anything like that. So it was just maybe the Mass on a Sunday, but that was certainly, we wouldn't have questioned not going to Mass or anything like that when we were growing up. My parents died quite young, actually, when I was in formation. They died very close to one another, and that was something that marked my own life in a very major way. I did my Leaving Cert at 17, so I was quite young when I did my Leaving Cert, and I took a year out to try and, I suppose, discern is the big word now, to discern or to reflect on what way of life I wanted to follow. And I had inklings of the priesthood from a very early age, or when I was around 11 or 12, but I still wasn't so sure about it. So anyway, in the heel of the hunt, making a long story short, I entered the seminary in 1989. And that's kind of significant, because we'll all remember, well, 1989, it was still kind of, what I would consider maybe the old church in Ireland. you know, things started to change in 1992 with the Eamon Casey affair being exposed. I do have to admit that my formation, and again, I think it's important to share this. When I went in to train to be a priest, that's what I was doing. But in fairness, when I went in, I would have found that the formators would have been saying to us, look, forget about maybe the priesthood for the time being. What you need to discover is what your baptismal call is about. And in fairness, there was a huge focus on baptism and what that meant as you were going into formation for the priesthood, that the first thing was to discover what baptism was all about. And that very much shaped a lot of the formation that I went through, which I think was a very positive thing. I also think most of my formation was in Carlow College. There was a lot of human formation done, a lot of group work, you know, coming in touch with yourself and so on and so forth. So that was a great help on my own formation journey. I did have doubts during my formation. In my third year, I think it was, I wasn't too sure whether this was for me or not. So I actually left the seminary for a year to try and get clarity in my own mind about where I was going in life. And but anyway, I felt, yes, after that year, it cleared my mind, and I felt that I did want to go back to the seminary and follow up with this I suppose this commitment towards priesthood. As John was saying there, I was ordained in '97, and all my life of ministry has been really rooted in parish, and I've loved every minute of it, I must say. I've loved parish life, the huge variety that it offers, and indeed the great privilege and the fantastic people that you meet along the way in the life of ministry. But I have worked in the areas of vocations and youth ministry and local media as well, which was a great privilege also. My ministry in Newbridge, which was the parish before I came to the west of Ireland, my ministry in Newbridge was very much based, it's a very large parish, more or less kind of a suburb of Dublin, really. And it was very much a team ministry there. There was 11 of us on the parish team there. And it was just a lovely experience. I really enjoyed my time there in Newbridge, and everything was going fine. And to be honest with you, I would have felt maybe that was going to be where my life was going to be, probably up to the time I was going to retire, whenever that would be. But then in December 2019, just before Christmas, and I remember I was doing Christmas cards, I think, at my desk one morning, and the phone went, and it was the papal nuncio, and he was asking to see me. So I went up that afternoon, and he was saying that Pope Francis wished to appoint me as Bishop of Achonry. Now I can genuinely say that it was an enormous shock to me, because I never mixed in that kind of circle or anything like that. So it really, you know, came out of the blue at me, and I didn't accept it immediately. I actually took quite a few days to think about it and reflect on it, and it was a torturous few days, I have to admit. But anyway, eventually I went back to him and we discussed it further, and at the end of that I accepted the position. It's something that has turned my life upside down completely. The pandemic obviously hasn't helped either, and I can certainly say here tonight, in all honesty, and you know, as I say, John would know me from my time in Clane and Rathcoffey parish, that I certainly miss parish life. I miss the buzz of parish life in the position I'm in now. So that's basically just maybe a little bit of my own story. And I think it's important that we share our story, so you know a little bit about me and where I'm coming from. But again, just moving on then, you know, as I look back to 1989, as I mentioned there, you know, it was kind of, as I see it, as the pre-scandal church. And then, you know, into my formation, came into 1992, the Bishop Casey affair emerged. And then obviously that escalated hugely throughout the 1990s with the whole experience of the exposition of the child sexual abuse scandal in the church. So it was very much part of my life in my formation as I was preparing for priesthood. There was a lot of discussion in the church. But what I found in my experience, that an awful lot of the discussion in church was by people who had experienced maybe the church of the 50s and 60s. And in a certain sense, like the church of the 50s and 60s, didn't relate to my experience of church. Because the church that I grew up in, the church maybe I was formed in my formation, was very much a church that was being questioned. So that was part of my experience all along, a church that was being questioned. Whereas, and many of you might remember this or would know of this, obviously, and this is what I would have heard, that the church of the 50s or 60s was, a black and white church. There was certainties there. It was a very powerful institution. Whereas today, and maybe the church that I have been more used to, is a church I feel it's far more real, maybe. And maybe it's a church that's connected more with the experience of the early church that maybe we see in the Acts of the Apostles. So just going to move this thing on forward a little bit here now. It's made my life. So there were a lot of questions, and you see there the image of the desert. And sometimes I find that my experience of church is a little bit like that. It's the image of the wilderness. And I've often said myself that, we have this story in the Old Testament, the early scriptures, about the Israelites wandering around in the desert, maybe not too sure what direction they were going. And maybe that's a little bit what my experience of church has been like throughout my own life. That sense of wandering around, maybe not too sure what direction we're going. So it kind of captures that for me. So moving on then to coming out of that, in that sense of desert, that sense of wilderness, moving on to our topic of synod or synodality. I believe myself that, this is a great opportunity in the midst of all of these questions, in the midst maybe of the desert experience, the wilderness, to be able to reflect upon our experience of the church. And just to give a little bit of clarity, I think John and Colin were referring to it there earlier on. As you're probably aware, Pope Francis launched the journey towards the Synod in Rome in 2023. It's kind of nicknamed the Synod on Synodality. And the main themes are there on the screen on your left-hand side there. You see communion, participation, and mission. And as I say, it was launched by Pope Francis there. And basically what he wants is, he wants to get feedback from all of the local churches, literally from throughout the world, and that this would be fed in to this Synod in Rome in 2023. And that's it, I suppose, in a nutshell. But tonight, maybe we're looking more on the right-hand side of the screen, and I have my head in the way here now, but anyway, you'll see what I mean. We're talking maybe more about our own situation here. Now, obviously they're connected, but talking about the Irish Church and our own synodal journey. And again, you're probably aware that it's, generally speaking, probably going to be around a 5-year journey. The first 2 years will be a listening process, listening to what's out there, see what emerges, and then reflect and discern on the next steps that will lead to an assembly or assemblies in the following 3 years. So that's the very basic kind of, I suppose, journey that we're looking towards. Now, the important point in relation to that right-hand side in the Irish Church and the Irish synodal journey is that it emerges out of a question that's a critical question, and it will be so important to return to this question, I think, as we go on this journey together. And that question is basically something like this: what is the Lord, or what is the Spirit asking of us as a church today in Ireland? What is the church, or what is the Lord rather, asking of us as a church today in Ireland? I think that's the basic question. I'll refer to that again in a few moments' time. And again, just to say about this evening, like, I'm just sharing a few general points really tonight, as I would have said to Colin Mary on when he kindly asked me to participate here this evening. And this is a teasing out together. I don't really see myself as an expert around synodality. I'm far from it. And it's as much a learning process for me as anybody else. So I see tonight as just a kind of a sharing of ideas. just to help us again move on another little bit, looking at Pope Francis and what he said in his Pentecost homily this year, I think might be helpful to us to understand a little bit of where he is coming from in relation to this whole journey of synodality. In his Pentecost homily, and it is a very rich homily, I was studying it over the last few days. Well, basically, first of all, he talks about the primacy of the Holy Spirit, and being a Jesuit, that's very, very important for him. So the primacy of the Holy Spirit he talks about. But then he goes on to make these 3 points in his homily. And the first one is in relation to living in the present. He says that the Holy Spirit advises us to live in the present. And again, I think that's helpful. He goes on to expand on it by saying that, we're not to be paralyzed by the rancor of the past or fear about the future. I think that's very real. Synodality offers us all an opportunity to share our experience of the church of today. And people need to be heard. I'm sure you're aware that there have been a lot of listening processes in various dioceses across the country, which is a very good and very positive thing, listening processes. But we have to ask the question, are we actually hearing what people are saying? It's a very, very real and important question. And this has to be at the heart of our synodal journey, what people are actually saying, and are we actually hearing that? So living in the present, our experience of the church of today. The second point he makes in that homily for Pentecost is that he says the Spirit tells us to look to the whole, to focus on the bigger picture. The Spirit shapes us into, and I like this little saying that he often uses, into a unity that is never uniformity. And he gives an example of that. He looks at the apostles and he says, when you look at the group of the apostles, they were all so different. You take Matthew, he was the tax collector. He collaborated with the Romans, whereas Simon, he was a zealot who actually fought the Romans. So they had contrary political ideas. They were coming at life and at the world with totally different visions, completely different visions. And yet when they received the Spirit, they gave primacy to the whole of God's plan. Their individual viewpoints weren't as important in the light of the whole of God's plan. And the Pope goes on to apply this to today's experience. He says that if we listen to the Spirit, we will not be concerned with conservatives or progressives. And when we do get caught up in that, then the church has forgotten the Spirit. That's according to Pope Francis. And I think that is a very important point. I know my own experience at the moment, and I'm just a year as a bishop now, I'd be very conscious of maybe the polarization today in the church. I'll come back to this again a little bit later on. There are very strong viewpoints. And to be honest with you, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a positive thing, but they're on both sides. But it does bring out that there's a great passion for the church and a great passion for the mission that is entrusted to us. Now, there's different views of how we maybe should fulfill this mission, but nonetheless, the energy is there. And I think that's something very, very positive that we should grasp and hold on to. The third point he makes in his Pentecost homily is that the Spirit advises us to put God before yourself. There's a need to empty ourselves in order to leave room for the Lord. So we shouldn't focus merely on our own effectiveness or efficiency. We must become more conscious of the transcendent and the place of the transcendent. And I think that's an important point for society today, to become more conscious of the transcendent as we maybe block that out somewhat in society in this day and age. So I just share those few little points with you from his homily, because I think they're helpful little pointers that give us an insight into how maybe he is approaching synodality in relation to listening to the Spirit and being open to the Spirit. So I'm going to come back to that question now that I was just mentioning a few moments ago. This really, well, it looks a very simple question in one sense when you see it there in words, but it's a very important, a very critical question. What is the Lord saying to the Irish Church today? That's the question that I think we're all going to be focusing on this synodal journey. And the critical point in trying to grapple with this question in some shape or form is the whole question of discernment. And again, this is, you know, Francis to the core when he talks about discernment. Again, it's very much the way of life of the Jesuit that discerns. And basically, we're probably asking ourselves the question, you know, in this discernment process, you know, what road is the Lord calling us to follow? Which direction does he want us as his church to follow? In the dramatic photograph there in front of you of the two roads there in the forest, where does the Lord want us to go? What road does he want us to follow? And for Pope Francis, again, you're probably aware of this, when he talks about synodality, he has said several times that he fears people understand synodality as some form of, as he calls it, a parliamentary process or model. And I say he often refers to this. And he's saying that he thinks people might feel that synodality is about, you know, a discussion followed by a vote, and maybe the majority, you know, win out, or whatever way we might put it. Or for me, the image I would have is, you know, we've all probably been at those meetings where the flip charts come out, you know, those flip charts, and we're all putting things on the flip charts, and you know, we have all the answers then kind of on the flip charts. But that's not what Francis is talking about. Francis is talking about something far deeper in relation to discernment. He feels that discernment is an attempt to discover in some way God's mysterious plan for us as a community of disciples. It's a gift of the Spirit, you know, to allow the Spirit to surprise us on our faith journey. He's touching into that in some way in relation to discernment, and it's certainly crucial for him anyway in relation to synodality. Some of you would be aware of the commentary on the Amazonian Synod, and we know that one of the very big questions in the Amazonian Synod was a reflection on whether married men should be ordained. And interestingly enough, Francis said that there was rich discussion and there was rich debate, which was very positive, and it was a very good thing. But he said there was no discernment, which was kind of unusual. I had to grapple a little bit with that. What did he mean by that? There was discussion and there was debate, which was very rich, was very good, but it wasn't discernment. And all I can make out of it is that maybe there was no moving forward together. There was very strong views on either side, but in some way, maybe they didn't come together. Things hadn't moved forward. Therefore, it wasn't the time to make a decision on this. However, critically and very importantly, and maybe this wasn't emphasized at the time, the door is not closed on that question. And the Pope hasn't closed the door on that question, but maybe it's for another time. But I think that's an important point in there. So this process of discernment and trying to discover maybe God's mysterious plan for us as the people of God is critical, and it's going to call for a lot of prayer. A deep sense of prayer has to be involved in this process of synodality. And we must enter this prayer together, being open to the Spirit. See where the Spirit leads us. And for Francis, again, he says, you know, that this may require a letting go of our own agenda and being open to the prompting of the Spirit, wherever that prompting may lead us. And I think there are great examples of this in relation to the scriptures. First of all, if we look at the scriptures, models of discernment. If we look to the early church, we see examples of discernment. Whenever you get a chance, if you do get a chance, maybe later on or at some stage, to look at Acts 15. There was a very, very hot topic in the early church. It was about the Jewish Christians and how they would reach out to the Gentiles, how literally they would reach out to the wider world. And as I say, it was an issue that caused deep tension in the early church. But there's a couple of lines in there that are very, very important and very insightful in relation to synodality and in relation to discernment and a prayerful discernment. Acts 15:22, the line goes as follows. Then the apostles and the elders, together with the whole church, decided to choose representatives from among them to send to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. So I thought it was an interesting little line there where, you know, the apostles and elders, together with the whole church, decided. What a lovely model that is, that it wasn't just a select group decided, but it was the whole church. And then it goes on in Acts 15:28 to say, you know, they bring out the message that we, with the Holy Spirit, have decided not to put any other burden on you. That's in relation to the Gentiles. But it's an interesting little insight and line there again in relation to the early church. We with the Holy Spirit. So it wasn't just them, their own agendas. It was part of what the Spirit wanted. So I think that's very, very important and very, very significant. And indeed, it was because of that decision that the action of the Spirit allowed the new Christian faith, which was in its infancy, obviously, at that stage, to spread widely into the new world, into the Gentile world, illustrating that it must have been the action of the Holy Spirit, that the Spirit must have been behind what the church was deciding in that moment. So a very, very powerful example of discernment and the critical role of the Spirit in the life of the church there in Acts 15. But there are other examples as well. And again, I was reflecting upon this a little bit as I was preparing for this evening. Ones that maybe we would be more familiar with ourselves. Yesterday was St. John the 23rd's feast day. It was actually the day he launched Vatican II, the 11th of October, 1962. But there was a documentary on him the other night, and as we're all probably aware, he was seen as an elderly man. He was a stopgap pope. He wasn't going to make any major decisions as they would have thought and so on. But they did an interview with his personal secretary, himself obviously quite an elderly man when he was being interviewed. And he was saying very shortly after Pope John's election that he came to his secretary 3 times and he started mentioning things about having a council in the church. 3 separate occasions he came to his secretary mentioning this thing about the council. And his secretary was, you know, looking back now on all of this, and he was saying that in a sense that the Spirit obviously must have been prompting the Pope in some way. And I think it was within 3 months of his election that he was now announcing the whole council, the whole Second Vatican Council, and what was going to happen. And again, one might say that surely to goodness, those promptings were the action of the Spirit to bring fresh air through the whole church at that time. And again, to root that thing of maybe discernment and the sense of the Spirit surprising us or bringing us in a direction that maybe we're not expecting. Some of you may know Sister Concilio. I've met Sister Concilio a few times myself. She was a young sister in Athy in County Kildare. She worked in the hospital, St. Vincent's Hospital there in Athy. And for whatever reason, there was well, mostly men at that stage who were maybe, as we would have described in olden terms, men of the road, who maybe had struggles with alcohol and addiction and so on. And they used to go to St. Vincent's Hospital, to Sister Concilio, to get a little bit of help and so on, and probably a little bit of comfort. And, you know, even though she was nursing in the hospital, that wasn't her role as such. But through her own prayer, through her own reflection, through her own openness to the Spirit, she decided to take a different direction. And she bought a piece of land and a little place not too far from St. Vincent's Hospital in Nathy that became Cúnmhara. And that obviously grew and flourished and served the needs and continues to serve the needs of thousands and thousands of men and women who find themselves maybe caught up in the whole cycle of addiction. And I think that's a wonderful example of discernment of how the Spirit works maybe in the life of the church as well. And to say, I actually worked in Cúnmhara for a few months myself, so I have great time for what Sister Concilio did there. She's a really terrific person. So these are just a few examples, and I know we'd all have loads of examples ourselves, I'm sure, of discernment and how the Spirit can surprise us. And I think this journey that we're on, please God, as an Irish church together, you know, it calls us to enter into this prayerful discernment, to listen to the Spirit in order to serve the mission of the church. And the first phase of it here in Ireland kind of coincides with the one in Rome, but again, trying to focus a little bit on our own situation here in Ireland. The first 2 years of the synodal journey are attempting to do this, to enter into this prayerful discernment. And, you know, there's a steering group, which I happen to be on. That's the general overall group looking at the whole journey. But there's a task group, there's 4 people on the task group who are literally tasked with you know, reaching out to people, to all of the groups out there who wish to participate and to feed back to the Irish Church what they would like to see as part of this synodal journey. So that process is just beginning now at this moment in time, so that as many people as possible can be involved in this discernment process. And then we can harvest what the various groups and people and individuals and so on are saying. And then we'll see what emerges there to see what the next stage of the journey might entail. So again, that's a very general kind of a point in relation to the synodal journey. Now, just to move on a little bit, that's all lovely in theory, in a sense. You know, that's probably nothing new in what I'm saying to you in that there tonight. But I was saying to myself, like, what do I share here this evening? And, you know, in my participation on this journey, this synodal journey, I'm thinking to myself, like, what are my fears around this journey? And what are my hopes around this synodal journey? So maybe just to share a little bit of my own fears and hopes. And as I say, we can chat about these anyway in the questions and answer session to see, do you identify with them yourself or whatever. So first of all, looking at my fears, you see there the red button issues only. What I mean about that is, I think for myself, some people might have the image of a synod as being some form of maybe, you know, a big gathering of us in a hotel somewhere for a week or whatever it is, in 3 or 4 or 5 years time, whatever it is, coming back to our flip charts again and, you know, having those kind of discussions, and that just the red button issues are discussed and debated and decisions are made on them. Now, I'm not saying the red button issues should not be discussed. Absolutely not. Of course, they need to be discussed. But I think there has to be more to it than just the red button issues. And my fear would be that we get caught up maybe in our own agendas rather than the bigger picture of the mission that we're given by Jesus Christ to share the gospel in today's world. So that's a naming a fear that I might have. Whether it's justified or not, I don't know, but I'm just naming it. The second question is, and I mentioned this a little while ago, was in relation to polarization. I find myself, again, in my kind of new job here, through the correspondence I would get, it's a learning for me about the different positions in the church. I certainly know that I made a statement earlier in the year that I saw that polarization coming out in the correspondence and the emails and so on that I got. And my fear is around, I suppose, the division in the church at the moment. You know, some people want to see very major change in the life of the church. Others don't want to see change at all. They want to see us going back to where the church was, maybe, as I said recently in a homily in Knock, maybe going back a century or maybe centuries ago. So you have those two polarized positions. And my fear is that for some, if change doesn't happen as they would like to see it happen, that there will be disappointment and disillusionment. And then for others, if change does happen, then they will be disappointed and disillusioned. So it's a tricky area, and we're certainly going to need the Spirit to navigate and to help us to deal with the different views, the strong views that people have. And everybody is obviously entitled to their views, but we will need the Spirit to guide us and to navigate us through all of that. The third fear I have there, I suppose maybe it's a little bit connected with the first one there, but you know, that it would be issue orientated rather than mission orientated. Our call as a community of disciples is to share Jesus Christ and the vision of his gospel. Like Vatican II, in a sense, was a missionary council. It wasn't a council about modernization as such. It was about mission. And again, my fear would be that maybe that might get lost a little bit if it becomes very controversial just about issues. Again, just naming a fear. And the final fear I would have there is probably more, but these are the ones I'm naming anyway. The last one there is, you see, once off. And again, I suppose I fear that, you know, we just see this as a once-off journey that, you know, over the next couple of years and then moving on to the next phase in the next 2 or 3 years after that. And that, you know, come 4 or 5 years time, we have our synod and or our assembly or assemblies, and that's it. I think that would be a big mistake. I think that this may be a step towards what it is like to be or to be church. It's a way of being church, synodality. It's not just a beginning, middle, and end over the next 2, 3, 4 years. It has to be a way of being church. So my fear is that people would sort of say after 4 or 5 years that, you know, that's it. But no, I hope it will encourage us to be more open to the Spirit in the life of the church for many, many years to come. So they're my fears. So moving on to maybe a little bit more positive elements from my own perspective, and these are my hopes. As mentioned in the introduction there earlier on, I was saying about my experience of the church has been maybe a little bit like the Israelites wandering around in the wilderness, maybe feeling that little bit lost, wondering where we're going. And that obviously has been compounded by the scandals that have been revealed in recent years, the various changes in society that we've all experienced and continue to experience, the whole explosion of social media, all of that world has changed so much for all of us. But I see in this synodal journey one of opportunity, I suppose, a real opportunity for us to reflect in a prayerful way together on where the Lord is calling us. And I think that has to be a positive thing. Out of our experience of the last few decades, you know, where are we being called now by the Lord in the midst of all of these challenges? Where are we going? So despite all of the challenges that we're talking about, and we all are a part of this, despite all of those challenges that we're aware of, there's great opportunities, I think, in this journey. And that's a great hope of mine as we step out into this synodal journey. The second hope that I have is that we can reflect on the whole area of leadership in the church. You know, when leadership is mentioned in the church, our minds tend to jump to the clerical system. And Pope Francis has been very strong in his condemnation of clericalism, and rightly so. And I think this seriously needs to be looked at further. And I believe serious conversion is needed around this whole area of clericalism. But there's another side to it as well. I think conversion is also needed in the hearts of people in parishes to take real responsibility for the life of the church, that we have maybe to walk the road of conversion in that area as well. And I hope, again, my hope would be that we can tease this out, this whole area of leadership in all its shapes and forms, that we can tease this out in a very real way on our synodal journey together. My third hope is that our journey will be a life-giving journey for us all. We're not all the same. Thank God, we might say. You know, Pope Francis says, as I said earlier on, unity does not mean uniformity. And I think that's a very good summary of what we're about. And I've no doubt, as we take this journey, it's going to be messy at times. And I think there's going to be tensions. I think there's going to be disagreements all along the way. There has to be, I think. But I think that the really positive aspect in the midst of all of this is that there is an energy still there in the midst of this journey. The late Father Michael Paul Gallagher, the Jesuit, whom I had a great time for, he said, I think many years ago, that apathy is the great enemy of the church. And I would agree with him with that. Apathy is the worst of all if we don't care and there's no energy around church. But I still believe that no matter what angle we're coming at the church from, we still all want the best for the church community. And we now have an opportunity to harness that over the coming years. And even though some aspects of what we will be discussing will be in the Irish context, I hope that some of our discussions can inform the universal church as well, that it reaches out into the worldwide church, what we discuss in our own discussions in relation to what's happening in Ireland. The fourth hope I have is that our journey would look outwards with a kind of what I would call a missionary zeal. That I hope this journey just doesn't end up kind of an inward-looking journey, a kind of navel-gazing journey into how we maybe, what would I say, how we live our life as a church in Ireland. An example being, you know, we'll hear debates nowadays about how the liturgy should be carried out. Now, I'm not saying that obviously the liturgy is at the heart of the life of the church. It's very important. But sometimes there's little nuances of issues around liturgy or whatever that becomes the be all and end all. And I don't think that's what the synodal journey is about. I think it's about something far greater, far bigger. I think the synodal journey is about how we reach out to others. How do we reach out to the poor as an Irish church? How do we reach out to young people? How do we reach out to those who feel they don't belong to the church because of their life circumstances? How do we reach out to those who feel disillusioned with the church? How do we reach out to those who were hurt by the church? How do we reach out to those who find themselves on the fringes? How do we bring the message of Christ, the message of the gospel, such a powerful message, to the public sphere in a very real and credible way today in the light of our recent history as a church? So my hope would be that, you know, that we will be outward looking, and that these will be the bigger questions that emerge on our journey, and that we try and struggle with them in whatever way, shape or form we can. My fifth hope would be that we would have a genuine openness to the Spirit. Pope Francis, in his address at the weekend, as he was launching the worldwide synodal journey, reminded us of the attitude that says, "We have always done it this way. I have heard that in parish. I've heard people say that to me when I'd be trying to do something different. People would say to me, but Father, we've always done it this way. And Pope Francis is very aware of that. And he says that there's the temptation out there, not to change, or that we apply, and this is from the Pope himself, that we apply old solutions to new problems. A very powerful statement from the leader of the church. So he sees the synodal journey as a process of becoming. And I think that's an exciting and engaging effort that can draw us into communion and participation directed to mission. It must be directed to mission. And I'm hoping, one of my hopes is that this journey that we're on together will be, please God, an exciting and engaging journey that is rooted in Jesus Christ. We're all called to holiness. There's the universal call to holiness. And I think myself, sometimes when I hear holiness, and I think some other people might identify with this, we kind of think of it in a kind of a devotional sense. And that's where I come. I'm blocking it now on the screen, but I come to what Origen said about holiness. And I think it's a fantastic way to capture what holiness is. Origen said that holiness is to see with the eyes of Christ. And I thought it was a fantastic way to describe what holiness is, to see with the eyes of Christ. And my hope in this is that this synodal journey will help us to see with the eyes of Christ, and that the concerns of all the baptized are listened to, and that we try to work together to respond to those concerns. Again, we're back to where we started earlier on, to that listening, to being heard. So just kind of maybe to draw this together a little bit in conclusion, I'm sure we're all familiar with the very beautiful story of the road to Emmaus. And in a sense, there was prayerful discernment going on in that journey as well. And as we return to that story of the road to Emmaus, which is one of my favorite pieces of scripture, I think it provides us with a wonderful insight into our own journey, the journey that we're starting out on. As we all know, we had the two disciples walking along the road. They had heavy hearts, they were downcast, they were disillusioned. Many of us have been there. Maybe many of us are there at this moment. But it was in that moment of disillusionment and heavy hearts and so on that they have this encounter with the risen Jesus. And it's an encounter that transforms them. And they literally see things in a new light. And the encounter turns their lives around. They were going in the wrong direction, but their encounter with Christ turns them around, and now he sets them back in the right direction. And with hearts burning within them, they have to share with others their encounter with the risen Lord. They can't keep it to themselves. What a powerful, encouraging story that is for us. It's the road that we're all on at this moment. And may we too encounter that risen Lord as we take this journey together. And I just leave us with the final image here, which is probably sums up what I'm trying to say here tonight, that in a sense, we're like that person on that rock. And as we start out on this synodal journey, it's a matter of taking that leap, trusting in the Lord, trusting in the Spirit, that we land in the right place. So maybe we just need that little push to get us out onto this journey and to have that faith and trust in the Lord, despite all of the challenges that are probably going to lie ahead for us. So that's my tuppence halfpenny, as to say, for this evening, just to open up discussion around the synodal journey. So I'd probably hand back there now to John or to Colm there this evening. Thanks a million.